All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Code 3 Industries. I am Nick Lopez, and today I am joined with our guests from the land down under. Thank you for joining me from on the other side of the world. I know it's Monday right here. It's Tuesday afternoon over there. So, yes, my good friend Joshua Bailey. Australian Federal Police and Australian military, and now a psychologist. So, Josh, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, mate. Yeah, Tuesday afternoon. Nice sunny day here on Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Yeah, beautiful part of the world. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, mate. Looking forward to it.
No, thank you. So, yeah, just to start off, yeah, let's just talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, your background. What kind of what made you want to go into, the military?
Yeah, great question. So I guess for me, it was just the sort of want to serve my country back then. So I joined in 1994 as a 17-year-old. And really, my generation were the first ones not to be conscripted, I guess, in a long time. So basically, the way it was for me was my dad joined the army, my grandfather was conscripted. It just seemed like a natural progression, really, to join I joined the Army Reserve because I was an apprentice. So I went and joined the reserves anyway because it was kind of expected that you would join something. And so for me, it was the reserves. My grandfather was the captain of the local bushfire brigade, and he'd been doing that for about 3 decades. So he'd had that, lifetime sort of service fire brigade. So bushfires are fairly massive in Australia.
Mm.
So they still are to this day. One of our states is pretty ravaged by bushfires as we speak. So it was kind of expected of me to do something for my country, in some aspect. And I chose the Army Reserves, and I spent about 6 years there. And then I joined what's called the Australian Protective Service, which is like they used to do sort of, yes, loosely defined as policing security at international airports. And then September 11, really unfortunate incident, as you know, occurred. And then I was on the first ever Air Marshal program in Australia, November 2001. And so I broke away from sort of the airport into the Air Marshals for a while. And then I went to Papua New Guinea, which is a country just above Australia. Used to be a former Australian territory. And then I went to Solomon Islands to do peacekeeping in 2003, before joining the Federal Police proper in 2004 through to 2009. And then from there back into the army until I've medically discharged in 2020, January 2021. So I've been out of the army for 4 years, and since then I've just been constantly university for psychology. So I'm a provisional psychologist. So what that means in Australia is I can practice as a psychologist, but with provisions, i.e. supervision. So I have about another year to go before I become fully registered. So
Okay.
that's pretty much it. That's a bit of a just to give you a bit of a background for your listeners and for yourself. Work from
No,
there. That's pretty
yeah.
much it.
Thank
Yep.
you. So it's so being like provisional, I'm assuming it's kind of like same over here, is where you're kind of still not like a mentorship program, but you're still kind of you're accruing all your like clinical hours before you
Yes.
become like licensed. Okay.
Yeah. So I've still got so pretty much like you guys over in the States where you've got to do rack up hours. And those
Right.
hours equate to being registered, and then off you go by yourself. They unleash you in the community by yourself, essentially.
Hmm.
Um, that's pretty much how that works. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, pretty similar to here in the States. I know at least with me, you get your registration number. We have like LCSWs, LMFTs, APCCs. Um, and again, it's with us and psychologists, you get a registration number with the Board of Behavioral Sciences, and then you have to accrue so many. For us, in my specific field, it's 3,000 hours under supervision. And then you take your licensure exam, your law and ethics exam, and then it's kind of like you get the blessing to you know, if you want to go out, do your own private practice, or you're fully licensed to go ahead and diagnose. And but yeah, that sounds pretty similar to yeah, to what you guys have over
Yeah,
there.
I think it's kind of mirrors where once you finish honors, you need 3,000 hours, but now you have to spend an extra year at uni. So now I've done that year. My last year is 1,500 hours, and that's broken up into direct client hours and then non-direct client hours and then supervision and then continuous professional practice. Oh, sorry, professional development,
Gotcha.
where you'd learn from other psychologists and stuff. So it's about 1,500 hours in that year. And then you are what's called registered without restrictions. So you become a registered psychologist and then off you go. Yep.
Oh, gotcha. And
You have
so
to,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, sorry.
No, no, no,
Um,
you're good.
you like yourself, you have to do an exam. It's called the National Psychology Exam,
Hmm.
and the pass mark there is 70. I'm not sure what's in it. I haven't studied for it yet, but it sounds pretty hellish. So wish me luck on that.
Oh, most definitely.
I guess that's come. I got that to look forward to. Like you recently, mate. We have that to look forward to. Uh, an exam. Yep.
Right. All the fun shit.
Yeah, the studying stuff that has absolutely no bearing on your practice. Yeah, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
S- So I wanted to just to kind of backtrack a little bit,
Yeah.
and go back to your time going from your time in the military, then going becoming an air marshal, after right around after September 11th happened,
Yeah.
and then going into the federal police.
Yeah.
Was that always your goal, just to transfer over, or was it just something that, while you were doing as like an air marshal, like, you know what, I'm gonna try this.
I needed a job after I got. I went overseas to the army. I got back, and my contract had expired, and I was jobless. So I'd left my apprenticeship, went overseas with the army, came back. My contract with the army had finished because it was a reserve. In the reserves, you can do what's called continuous full-time service. Where you're a reservist, they put you on a contract, it finishes, and then you go back to just being a reservist. And I left my apprenticeship to do that. And I came back and I went back to my grandma and I said, "Hey, I'm back." She's like, "We need a job." And so I saw an ad in the paper. It looked like a good ad. I applied, I got accepted, and I was in what's called the APS, Australian Protective Service. And then the ASO Air Marshal gig came up. And once again, I was like, this is pretty serious. I reckon I could, you know, do that job because in the Air Marshals, essentially, uh, it's essentially if someone's hijacking a plane and they're going to use that as a weapon, then the currency really is death. If you're not fluent in how to kill, then you're going to become the currency. So as an air marshal, you're killing to live because they're living to kill you.
Mhm.
So if you don't get it right, you're going to become. If you're not fluent in how to kill someone, and you're sitting on a plane, mate, you're going to become a statistic, and the whole purpose of you being there is null and void. So I decided, well, if anyone's going to be an ASO, it's going to be me because good luck trying to take on anyone if I'm on the plane. But that was my thinking back then, and I don't remember ever being really scared. But if I had to do it now that I'm older, I'd be like, shit, I'm on the plane with a because back then it was all I was 24. I was like, sweet, this is pretty cool. Yeah, not 25 maybe. So I was like, well, this is a pretty cool gig, you know. Yeah, there was 16 of us on the first course,
Oh, wow.
and they we essentially had to do mock-ups of planes back in 2001, because Australia, that was a really big deal for Australia to go into something as serious as that at the time.
Mhm.
Australia didn't have air marshals. New Zealand didn't have air marshals. Our neighbour just across the ditch there. The only real people who had air marshals really were the US and the Israelis, maybe a couple other countries, but it was more of a Wesley Snipes type thing, Passionate 57 type thing. So
Right.
us being thrown in the deep end, the first few guys, we had to make up the training, run the training, you know, go around to every airport, see how to access the airports, because we were plain clothes, obviously.
Mm.
How do we access the airport so that the community don't know? How do we behave when you're sitting next to someone in business class? It was pretty funny, really. They brought in this, uh, um, it was like a non-verbal communication specialist teaching us how to lie so that we could pass on a cover story to the next person, and then have this training called a backstop where you divert the person's conversation back to them so they never really find out who you are. We had to undergo a bit of that training and taught us how to lie successfully. So the government's teaching us we need to be, integrity and all this sort of stuff, but teaching us how to lie. And
Teacher.
why are you here in business class, 23-year-old dude? Oh, I'm just here as my grandma paid for this seat, because they're expensive business class seats. I mean, I remember flying up in the 747. You know, the bubble in the 747, those small we flew up there, and it got a view straight to the cockpit, and there was a winding stairs down there, and the captain would come out and look at you to see what an air marshal looked like and give him a wink. But really, it was all just test and adjust in the first years. I don't know what it's like now. I don't know whether they still got them. I don't have any friends who've been there at the moment. I know a good mate of mine was there for a few years. A couple of mates, they were in and out for a few years. I was there for about a year. Then I went to go to the Solomon Islands because it was either or, so off I went. Yeah, it was an interesting time. They kind of we ended up in the newspaper and on TV a bit, not our faces, but the Air Marshal program itself, just to get the community aware of it. And they would tell the community that we wear suits with ballistic vests. When in reality, there were times where I'm wearing what I'm wearing now, just a t-shirt with a gun underneath the shirt type thing. I don't know if they still. I don't even know if we still have them. It's not a very. It's not something that people really base their sort of story or career around, or you don't see people writing books about it. You don't see anyone turning up saying, "Hey, I used to be an air marshal," and finding out that they're lying. It's not like defence or policing where people try and glorify it.
Right.
I'm certainly not doing that right now, but I'm just explaining what it was in the early years. And just on the back of that, I wouldn't say it was an exciting job, because in a country like Australia, the terrorists aren't taking over planes, well, not yet anyway. So it was quite a job where you turned up, you sat down, like everybody else, you got off the plane, and that was it. It was a very no one knew you were there type job, and that suited me, and that's the way it should be too. So it wasn't the most exciting thing happened to me was I sat next to a couple of celebrities, and that was pretty much it. I don't know if you've heard of Sophie Monk, Australian celebrity.
Yeah, I think I
Attractive.
have. I think so.
So she sat next to me, and she's this attractive, like, celebrity chick. I think she was in like some band, and she sort of looks at me, and she goes, and then that was it. That was my conversation with her. We were sitting next to her. I was like, well, okay, well, clearly I should start the conversation. That was probably my most exciting time, where celebrities would get on, and some would be talk to you and others wouldn't. I sat next to the New Zealand Prime Minister during CHOGM, so Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It's where the British Commonwealth get all the countries together, and they have this big meeting. I don't know what the meeting's about. It doesn't really have much pull, I don't think. But I sat next to her. She must have known who I was, because she was giving me sort of looks of, because we were carrying guns on the plane, but the Prime Minister and all the CPP team of the politicians, they weren't allowed to. It's a bit of a tense thing. And back then, you had these big phones, those old pin pad phones, before we did. So all the air marshals and the CPP carried the same phones. So you knew who everyone was, because you'd have your phone on your belt and say, like, oh, that dude's from, yep, okay, no worries. And they'd sit near the PM, and you'd be sitting there and give them a bit of a wink or whatever. But that's pretty much it. That's about as exciting as it got. I saw a lot of people continuously over time
Mhm.
flying, but I was lucky in the sense that I didn't get anything where I had to act, where I had to,
Right.
except actually, I remember telling Aaron this on the podcast. The head of the lead singer of Jamiroquai, the where he got on the plane in Brisbane, and so back then he was doing a tour of Australia, and his music would play on the plane as you board. They played music, Qantas would play music, um, and his song was on, and he got on, and there was a band member who got on before him. He had this big keyboard, and I'm like, oh, he puts it up in the lock, and then old mate JK, the lead singer, gets on, and he does this in real life. He's actually no different to the songs and stuff. Who's this guy? Anyway, he puts his foot up on the wall there because seat 1A is next to the aisle, but it's also next to the window, and there's an aisle there. So it's a good seat because it's by yourself. Whereas everything else in business class on the 7-6 is like 2 seats. So he puts his foot up on the wall where you put your coats in and all that sort of stuff. And he turns around and looks at me like this. And he gets out of his chair and he approaches me. He's doing these ones. And I'm sitting here. This is actually a good chair. I'm sitting here and I go like this. And then this lady just walks across. A flight attendant just walks across and goes, "Excuse me, would you mind just sitting there?" Just so casually. And I'm ready to, because he was coming straight at me and the door was closed. So if the aircraft door is closed, that means in Australia, it means it's in flight. So
Mhm.
therefore, the Crimes Aviation Act, which is a federal legislation, that then becomes applicable because it's deemed to be in flight, as in flying. So in flight in Australia means once the plane door's done, whether the plane's sitting on the tarmac or whether it's in the air, the rules still apply equally. And so doors closed, ready to go. He's had enough. He gets up, approaches me from pretty much over there. I'm like this, and then the lady just comes over and goes, like, "Excuse me, can you just sit down?" All right, so yeah. If he'd got near me, like if he'd, I would have. Back then, we were carrying 40 caliber H&K pistols, and they were hollow points.
Wow.
So the chance of him surviving anywhere from the thigh up, he's not surviving that. A
No.
10.4 millimeter, 40 caliber H&K USP firing from me to where my computer is, or that's how close he would have got.
Yeah. He's
Mate,
Swiss cheese.
oh, it would have been destructive.
Yeah.
It would have, mate, he's not surviving.
Right.
And anyway, back then, because it was the early years, I went back and told my boss. He was like, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about that, mate." Yep, nah, because there was no reporting measures. And so later on, there was a gentleman who he actually got a knife on board, and he ran the knife along the overhead locker compartment and walked straight down the aisle of an aircraft. And the two air marshals were like, "Fuck, what happens now?" And because there was no real reporting mechanism, they sort of let the plane land, and then they arrested him. So that happened because we didn't have uh, really the legislation or the training to use the legislation and when to act. We weren't really told what to do unless, because all our training was, there's a terrorist taking over the plane, they've got to the cockpit or they're trying to take the cockpit. There was no real training around what happens if someone makes a casual threat, or what happens if someone just produces a knife.
Mhm.
Like the casual thing on the street where a guy might produce a knife. He's not actually using it, he's just holding it. What do you do then? Do you just shoot him or do you just talk him down? There was no real training around anything that wasn't a kinetic terrorist event.
Mhm.
So the boys are sitting there going, well, what happens now? And when that bloody musician was coming towards me, I'm like, what happens now? Because
Yeah.
we were trained in Krav Maga and BJJ.
Yeah.
The problem with BJJ is there's not enough room to do, your figure eight lock or any of the other cool stuff. You're
Right.
not, where's the room? So the only place we worked out there was room to do that was at the back of the 767, where there's a kitchen area and it's quite a decent area. That's the only place. So you've got to drag them all the way down there 100 meters just so you can put them in some sort of sidebar or wrist lock, whatever it was. Not going to happen. So then we were trained in Krav Maga. So I was like, fuck, what do I do? And then in the end, the lady came over and just put him down. He swapped seats. But that was the only of any sort of exciting thing that happened in the ASO program. We had to call it the Air Security Officer Program because the Prime Minister at the time, John Howard, didn't like the word marshal. But we just called it air marshals anyway.
Sounded
Yeah,
like, was the term marshal like too threatening or too militaristic or?
I don't know, not sure. It was his. Rumor has it was his wife didn't like the term marshal, so he went, "Okay, honey, blah blah." Yeah, fuck. But if I'd hit him with that 40 caliber hollow point round, mate, he's not come back from that.
No.
So he's quite lucky in a sense. He's very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, because it sounded like you guys were just because it was so new at the time, you were kind of swimming in uncharted waters as far as, you know, what you can, what you can and can't do as far as.
Yeah. So this is where I don't want to say too much. I'm not sure if we still have ASOs, air marshals, but in case we do, then I'm going to call it talking about when they can and can't act.
Mhm.
But back then, we were only to act if it was a terrorist event or if someone else's life is in danger or your own. So
Mhm.
him coming towards me like this, you know, I was like, fuck, that would have been fair enough. But we're not there for drunken passengers, for example.
Right.
Whereas I think you guys, the air marshals there, you're law enforcement. Whereas we weren't law enforcement, we were counter-terrorism, which in Australia is two different things. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, what they call operational counter-terrorism,
Mhm.
which is a big deal for Australia because we're a fairly risk-averse country. So back at that time, it was a fairly big deal. 20, 23, 24 years ago, 23 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that aside from sitting next to the occasional politician, the occasional uh, uh, celebrity, Sophie Monk,
That was
that was,
the most action as an air marshal.
yeah, that's it. But that's just being realistic though, because in a
Yeah.
country like Australia, that's just what's going to.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, it's not going to be like Red Eye or Passion of 57 or anything like that. It's just the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And then,
Um,
grand scheme of things, I mean, if things are calm, things are good. If you know,
mm.
if
there,
there's.
there was there was a bit of suspicion though that Qantas uh, did have some persons in custody, or they had their own VIP people, and what they were doing was as they were putting air marshals on planes that didn't have any persons in custody, and they were using their own protection people. There was a bit of suspicion of that. I've no doubt that happened, but yeah. So the idea was you were meant to be told if there's any VIPs on board, because obviously there's a threat to them. So one time, Bill Clinton came out to Australia, and in Australia, if you're going to be termed a VIP, the government does that, gives you the term VIP. So when you're visiting, you get given VIP status, and I'm not sure what happens, but then that's announced. You get told that there's a VIP on board, and then you then know that that person's going to be there, and there's a particular threat, and you can monitor that potential threat. Well, Bill Clinton got on board one day. No one told the two ASOs on board, and they're like, "Why aren't we told?" That's because the government did not appoint a former president VIP status because he wasn't there for official means. He was there for a holiday. Yeah, we thought that was
Wow.
so that's the sort of thing that Australia's into, whereby we're pretty relaxed, pretty risk averse type. She'll be right type thing. Um, so we were all surprised when we had air marshals up and running, but I don't believe we had really the infrastructural backing to back us had we have had to engage,
Mhm.
a terrorist, so to speak. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm
Wow.
pretty sure it's tightened up now. I mean, it's been 20 something years.
Right.
You would
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah. You would hope, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
Uh,
that's pretty much that. Yeah, yeah.
and so after your time with the air marshals, you became you went to the police. You became
Yeah,
a.
so I went to what's called ACT policing, which is
Mm,
down in Canberra. Freezing cold during winter,
mm,
hot during summer. Yeah, so I did community policing down there as part of the AFP. Spent about 5 years down there. Met my wife Tracy down there. Yeah, that happened. Freezing, freezing. So Australia's not known for its cold. Let me tell you, if you're anywhere below Brisbane in winter, you're going to be cold. So anyone
Really?
who wants to come and visit Australia from the months of like April through to August, September, you're below Brisbane. Bring a jumper. It
Really?
can be cold. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
does it
Definitely.
snow over there?
It snows in certain parts. So in Victoria, certain parts. So Mount Hotham, and Mount Kosciuszko, sort of lower parts of New South Wales. Only in the really high parts. So high parts for Australia is like a mountain that's maybe a kilometre high, kilometre. 0.1% of the country gets snow. So not a lot of snow.
Mm.
It does snow. We do have a ski season, but I've never been. It doesn't interest me. But yeah, I don't know too much about it. It does snow. You hear about it. Um, People, they like to go skiing, but it, it does get cold during winter. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Gotcha. Nah,
Which is not well known.
no,
It gets cold.
yeah, when I think of Australia, I don't automatically think of freezing cold.
So in Australia, we have Anzac Day, which is Australia New Zealand Army Corps Day, and what that is that's the one day a year, 25th of April, in which we come together and commemorate the fallen. So it's a bit like, what do you guys have? Armed Forces Day over there. So it's
Yeah,
basically
Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. Yeah, so it's the equivalent of that, and that's in April. I went to my dad. He was running the service there. It was -2 degrees Celsius,
Holy
minus
hell.
two, and it's freezing. So it does get cold, very
Wow.
cold. And in Canberra, it gets below that. So back to Canberra, the ACT, it gets freezing. So at night time during winter, you'd be wearing thermals outside. Yeah, thermal pants. Yeah, it gets really cold. Yep.
Wow. And
Yeah, I
so
didn't realize it either.
and so, during your time as a police officer,
Yep.
what just to kind of give a better view or just a better idea for some of the listeners who are me included may not be as well informed about maybe some of the local or regional issues just where you were at. Like what were some of the typical calls that you would handle, or
Yeah.
what was the
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
daily?
I can do that for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay. So there's probably so as a Western country, we have problems with domestic violence. We obviously have problems with motor vehicle accidents. So your standard, it's the way motor vehicle accidents. We in the ACT they had a lot of government housing, so a lot of drug abuse. Heroin was massive when I was down there. Huge heroin problem. There was an area called Stewart Flats, and that was old government worker buildings, and they were huge, a lot of flats there. And that made the top 10 in Australia for crime statistics. That was in my jurisdiction. There was ice, there was drug use all through that building.
Mm.
It was massive. The issues there, theft related offences. So women would more do fraud, whereas the men would do more actual physical stealing and robbing. Um, Burglaries were massive. So you see that people would engage in conduct that where they were getting something from someone else without any permission in order to buy drugs.
Mm.
So it's drug related offences were massive. The DV was there, the occasional murder, but nothing massive. There was a double murder when I was there. 2 people got shot with a shotgun, I think. But just those sort of things. So
Okay.
drugs were big. DV, domestic violence was big. Fraud was big. drink driving happened a lot. So there, because it's the national capital, with all the embassies there as well, you had embassy staff, you had federal court judges, you had ASIO, which is the Security Intelligence Organization. You had ASIS, which is the Secret Intelligence Organization. They do stuff overseas. You had all those sort of people there. And sometimes they would get caught doing something wrong. That'd make news. You had to handle everything very carefully.
Mm.
If you came across to a car accident and the bloke said, and it had embassy plates on, then you'd have to be very careful. We would call out a specific team of police who would deal with embassies because they have diplomatic immunity, and the number of the plate dictated their position within that embassy. So if it was one, it'd be the ambassador. If the plate was 102, then it would be someone who was just chef or something. So you guys, the US has quite a large embassy in Australia, and your plates go up to a fair way, whereas someone like Myanmar might only have 10 cars, whatever. So that you would tell who you were dealing with by the number on the plate. So when some 19-year-old got out and said, "Oh, I'm the ambassador's son," well, they're not driving a car that says DC diplomatic corps, 428, because that's just not the way it works. So you kind of knew who you were dealing with by their plate, and then you would talk to them. But it all had to be treated very carefully.
I can imagine.
Because if you get someone from a very strict Islamic country and their son, the ambassador's son, is caught smoking pot and he gets sent home, then that could be the death penalty for them,
Yeah.
So which is what happened back, I think around the year 2000, one of the Islamic countries, the ambassador's son was caught smoking cannabis, which in Australia, not that big a deal. They felt it caused embarrassment to the country, sent him home, and he ended up being put to death by that country. So that was fairly big deal. So because of that, they brought out a new lot of rules, and you had to be very respectful, and which is what you'd be anyway. But it was a challenge on top of what you had to deal with every day.
Right.
Because you're dealing with, your politicians sometimes, judges. I pulled someone over and she goes, "I work for ASIO." And so ASIO is the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation. They do the internal secret shit, whatever they do, don't know, don't care. But she immediately announced herself. "I work for ASIO. I'm on my meeting." We pulled her over because there was like a traffic offence. And in the end, the AFP said, "We've got to let her off because she works for ASIO." Like there was just that only happened once, but I remember that being, one, you're not supposed to announce yourself, and two, I still remember that. So that's on the stress of that on top of dealing with people. Syringes were massive in Canberra. I used to use my OC spray a lot because it would give you the distance, spray, and then because syringes were big, and if there's a syringe problem, then you're going to have a Hep C problem because they share their syringes, and then you might have a HIV problem. So it was massive down there. Needle stick injuries didn't happen much, but you had to be very cautious of them. Yeah, very much so.
Wow.
So it's a bit different to America, where you may produce your firearm because you guys have more guns over there. Where here, I had my hand on my gun maybe twice in 5 years.
Really?
So it's totally different. But the threat level was different to say you guys. So syringes, knives, like edged weapons, but not as in a firefight. I never really thought it was only really once I thought I might get into a firefight with someone, but that was very, very brief. And that sort of threat went away pretty quick once I understood the situation. Yeah. In the Solomons, when I was in the Solomon Islands, there was always that threat of during the tensions. When I was over there in 2003 after they just kind of kicked off. There was threats of rifle use constantly. A bloke actually got shot and killed by one of the militia with an SLR, which is a 7.62 rifle they used in Vietnam, high powered. Like he fired 7 rounds for a police car, and the passenger was killed. That was just after I left. So there was always a threat over, and in Papua New Guinea has a lot of gun violence there too. There was a threat of that, but I was lucky in the sense that I never had to produce my weapon and be ready to go. Aside from that time in the Air Marshals where I was reaching for it, and then there was another time probably in Canberra. I was pretty lucky with that. Not a lot of times where I had to consider genuinely the use of lethal force, which I
Wow.
guess is pretty lucky. Yeah.
No, that is really good. Like you said, it feels like it's definitely some cultural differences. Like you said, in Australia, you're very, very risk averse. Very
Yeah, politicians. So what we're really having issues now in Australia, and anyone who's listening from Australia would probably relate, is we're having a real issue with the divide between the executive leaders, politicians, between the people who are doing the job in the ground, and that's both in the police and the military. So the divide between those who sit there and make decisions from an office
Mhm.
and worried about how they look is quite huge compared to people like you and I who are doing the job for real. So you and I might do a job whereby you have to take a person into custody. The person may get injured. You may get injured. Someone may have filmed it. Might look, you're doing the best you can when you can. It might not look good. And in Australia, we're getting problems with the bosses siding with the person taking the video film, or someone who's made a complaint who's completely vexatious, but they'll side with them because they're worried about how they're being viewed. Or we have a lot of problems with officers in the army downgrading commendation recommendations whilst giving themselves medals themselves. We've just had a couple of weeks ago on the 7th of February a parliamentary inquiry into Defence Honours and Awards, where they heard that basically with your rank, you would be given a conspicuous service medal or a conspicuous service. It pretty much went with your rank. If you become a lieutenant general or major general, then another major general would nominate you for a medal because you're at that rank.
Mhm. Wow.
Whereas on the ground, general duties policing, or the soldier on the ground in Afghanistan or Iraq or Timor or wherever, they weren't getting that same recognition. So we've got so when you say risk adverse reflects the people who get the executive and the politicians. That's who it's benefiting. It's not benefiting the people on the ground. And I saw that in the AFP.
Well,
Still,
well, if it makes you feel any better, that's that's going on in the States here too. A lot. Yes. God, I
it's
think
disappointing.
we
Yeah,
can have an entire episode talking about just that one subject.
yeah.
But
It what it does do just quickly is it negatively impacts recruitment and retention.
mhm.
And so you won't really see, or you may not see, your grandfather joining the police of the army, your dad joining the police of the army, your son joining the police of the army, because it stops at that. Generationally, it will stop somewhere. And if
Mhm.
people see that you're not serving your country, or you're serving a country but you're being fucked over, and everyone's being fucked over, and only the elites are benefiting, there's a clear disparity there. So eventually, a generation, which I think we're at now, is going to say, I'm not joining the army, or I'm not joining
Yeah.
the police. In
Right.
Australia now, they've just passed legislation to allow people who have lived here for 12 months, who have come from other countries, to go and join the Defence Force.
Mhm.
Other countries' citizens can come and join our Defence Force now, but for the first time ever, because we just can't get the people.
Wow.
That's about a month ago, I think, a couple of months ago. Yeah. So generationally, you're not going to see. You're going to see less of people joining because their dad joined or because their brother joined or whatever. You're just not going to see that anymore. It's going to have an impact on people joining, or the wrong people are going to join, which I think may be happening.
Right. I was going to say that's another problem you can have. Maybe some who aren't qualified or maybe who are joining up for the wrong reasons, becoming,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, becoming put in positions of power that that shouldn't be there in the first place. Or but that kind of goes into my next question is how are just generally when in your area of where you patrolled and where you worked, how was the police, how were they viewed? Were you generally supported by the community?
yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. Okay. So the police in Canberra. I'm not sure if
Mm,
it still is. Back when I was there, we were viewed that we were taking people's rights away.
mm,
And so there was a car accident I was in just quickly. We were lights and sirens. I was a passenger, I was a driver. We were trying to get around because in Australia, I'm not sure if it's like the US, you got lights and sirens, then it's law that the cars in front have to pull over and allow you to pass.
right.
And that's, fireys, ambos, police, emergency service. In Canberra, that doesn't happen. Regularly doesn't happen. They just won't pull over, or they just don't know how because it's all too stressful for them. It's outside an office, and they just. So again, we're caught behind this car, and this guy just wouldn't pull over because we're coming to take people's rights away. So in the end, the driver's like, "All right, well, we need to get where we need to be." And it was raining, and we aquaplane because we're trying to get around this car. We aquaplane, we crash, yeah, whatever. It was about 120 k's an hour. We hit a concrete light pole. The pole came down, ripped the door off the driver's side, um,
Wow.
cut the steering wheel in half. Oh, I had to kick my way out of the car. Yeah, just a car accident. And the guy in the red car who wouldn't let us pass, he drives up. He goes, I've got a first aid kit." And I'm pretty sure my words were, "Fuck off, mate. She's locked in the car. I need more than a first aid kit." And I pointed because I'd ran to the nearest intersection, which was Williamson Street and Highmarsh Street. I remember it. And I
Mm,
rang 000, and I was on my way to ring 000, which in Australia, 000 is 911.
okay.
Guy stayed. He did a Yui, didn't come in and help. He stayed there to make a complaint to another policeman who turned up a couple minutes later saying that I told him to fuck off. In the end, they said to him, "Mate, probably fair enough." Yeah, that's the sort of that's how you proceed in Canberra. It's very the police are there to take your rights away. The AFP bosses will take the side of the person who makes the complaint, not the police officer themselves. I know that personally. Um, it's very and so that's why people do it. People know that the AFP down there won't back their people, so they'll complain, knowing, and they know they magically might get a speeding ticket. I don't know, or whatever. They may not get that summons. That's a bit extreme, but they'll, the AFP very rarely back their people. And I don't know whether that's the same for the LAPD as well, but that's quite
Uh,
common.
oh man, that's a long story. Um, yeah, it's at least over the past several years, the city of Los Angeles itself has always been a very liberal city, um,
Yeah, yeah.
a democracy, democratic city. Um, it's hasn't been the most favorable towards police. I'm not going to sit here and say that, everyone hates the cops in LA, but generally it hasn't been the most friendly. At least I think we have a lot of supporters that they're a silent majority, whereas, you know, maybe the minority who it just seems who don't like you said, feel like their rights are being taken away, or they kind of see us as, Nazis, pigs, bootlickers. Um, it just feels like we haven't gotten the most support from the city. And then sometimes, like you said too, it feels like it's been similar incidents where maybe the administration or people feel like the department will will maybe back the citizens who feel this way rather than defending their own officers. And which is it's and these officers are doing their job. And obviously, do you have some bad apples in the bunch? Of course, but the large majority of officers are doing their job correctly in a professional manner, and yet still feel like they're getting thrown under the bus by the department to save face or to, quote unquote, kiss the ass of, the city council or the mayor. And so morale has been pretty bad within the department. And then retention rates as far as trying to get recruits has been bad. It's been
Wow. Yeah,
it's it's
seems
been it's been pretty bad. But I mean, like it's with large metropolitan cities here in the US, it's that's pretty par for the course. There's there's chunks of like more conservative like cities or towns outside of Los Angeles where a lot of these cops they do their time like the probationary year and they will transfer to there because they're liked by the community, they're supported there. The city attorneys that are there to defend cops, they want you there. They're backed a lot better than say like LAPD or Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And so yeah, it's kind of in yeah, LA is kind of in a limbo state right now. Um
tough.
so it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of in a weird area right now. We'll see if the pendulum swings the other way and more favoritism towards and more support of the police, but only time's gonna tell. But so when you were dealing with this in Canberra, outside of that specific area, was it similar to like what you faced in Canberra as far as like how the police are viewed, or was it or do you feel like there's more support outside of Canberra, like in a general sense?
Well, Canberrans are very, very far left leaning, very far left leaning. A bit like what you described, Los Angeles. I think Canberra, like Washington.
Okay,
Like Kamala Harris type left leaning. That's where we're at with
I
Canberra.
see.
So you can imagine if you got a former air marshal who's then become a community policeman, you can imagine how well I was received. So there was that, but yeah, I think in police in Australia are viewed, they're viewed as protectors. They're viewed as there to help. We need police, but there's certainly elements in the left area, left sort of socialist, sort of what your equivalent of democratic would be, not viewed very well, and that's very Canberra. In the sense they would have their supporters, absolutely, but as a general view, not seen favourably.
Mhm.
And that's the organisation as a whole. That's not singling out any individual. It's just that's what they're seen as.
Right.
But I think Australia in general would view police one as undermanned, underpaid, overworked, but they're seen as there's certainly with social media has a growing culture of acceptance of police. We're sort of marketed a lot better, former police and police themselves.
Mhm.
Victoria has a state, which is in Australia, has just sacked their commissioner, police commissioner. So a couple of days ago, the Victorian Police, its members, did a no confidence vote in the commissioner, Shane Patton, I think his name was. So he had to step down because he was more aligned, from what I'm told, more aligned with the politicians, which is what I was
See.
telling you about before. So the members have gone, well, mate, time to move on, and he's accepted that, and off he's gone. So that's a very recent example of disparity between the elites and the people on the ground, which is what we're seeing, especially here in Australia, from what I'm understanding there in the US as well, which doesn't need to be. I think you and I probably agree is that doesn't need to occur because if someone's an assistant commissioner, an inspector, a captain, or whatever, they're still at that rank. They're
Mhm.
still achieved what they've done. Is still they don't need to go the extra mile and not support their organisation. Because ultimately, the community doesn't wake up and go, I wonder what the police are doing today. They wake up and go about their day. You
Right.
only call the police the fireys or the ambos when you have to. So it's not, I think the elites have fallen into that trap of the community has an expectation, and that expectation is 24/7, and they're thinking about me 24/7. They're not. They're not celebrities. They're just a person who turns up on the TV when something happens, gives a 30-minute soundbite, and off they go back to their office. That's the way they are. They make decisions, managerial decisions. They've chosen that rank. Fair enough, you've earned it or you haven't earned it. Whatever. That's you, champion. You go off, you do your job, leave everybody else alone, and back the boys. Because they would have, at some stage during their career, needed someone to back them during times of hardship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's somewhat hypocritical when they get to a position which they may have or haven't earned and don't do the same thing which has happened to them. And as you say, there's bad apples, there's genuine bad apples. There's people who are painted to be a bad apple, but the genuine bad apples usually get found out and they're disliked pretty massively by people, and that's what can ruin it.
Right.
There was a time where I caught up in one of those as well, which sort of proved to be quite challenging. But, I think the police are getting better received, but once again, we're let down by the people above them in those ranks.
Yeah.
When they don't need to. What benefit? The only benefit you would say is they're only gaining personally from them supporting themselves because of how they want to be perceived, as opposed to how they should be doing the job. There's a difference there.
Right. Yeah. It seems like a lot of speaking of a lot of cops, or it feels like a lot of the times, cops are, less worried about, dealing with suspects out on the street, and they're more worried about dealing with their own department and their own administration being the ones that stab them in the back.
Yeah, backstabbing is quite large in the police force. It was whilst I was there. Yeah, and I think that's through fear of, or just not not resilient enough, maybe, or just being unsuited into that type of work, and so they revert back to what's comfortable. And so, if backstabbing makes people comfortable, then that's what they'll do, as opposed to doing what was right. Because popular opinion isn't fact; it's simply popular opinion. So, if you've got people who want to come together and backstab someone, that's not the fact. That's just an opinion that a bunch of people have put forward so they can be comfortable, as opposed to putting forward a fact whereby the truth comes out, and then it may or may not look as rosy as a boss may like it to look.
Right.
So that's what I mean by there is something happens out on the street, and there's an accusation made, and the organisation might look bad. Well, you know what? The organisation doesn't have to look bad if we tell the truth and we just say what was being told. And the organisation may have to go to the media and say, well, this is policing. This is what policing is. It's untidy, as opposed to trying to look the shiny, good sort of organisation that has no mistakes or no, I guess, no weak points.
Right.
Policing can be an ugly business. You know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't all have to be perfect. Striving for perfection is not going. It's just not a human thing that can do.
Right.
Unless you're Jesus, you're not going to be perfect.
Right.
And that's what people need to understand. So backstabbing can come from people who want to look perfect or absolve any guilt, and enforce the guilt onto someone who's an out member of the group. That's where I say that popular opinion isn't fact at all. Facts will always stay the same. There'll be consistency in fact. Yeah.
You're very right. And
yeah. Anyway, yeah.
And so, after your time, you being with the police force, what made you want to go into psychology?
So I joined the army. I left the AFP. I met Tracy, my wife, in the police force. We were triple O operators together. So that car accident, for example, I rang triple O and Tracy answered. And the horn was going because the driver was still trapped in the car. And I was like, hi, how you going? She's like, oh, hi, hun, how are you? And I'm like, no, I don't have time for that. So the fires and the ambos turned up, blah, blah. So we met, and then we decided to go to Queensland. Um, and then whilst I was up in Queensland, I wanted to get a trade. So a fitter and turner by trade. Because once you leave the police or the ambos or whatever, you might do 15, 20 years. You don't really have anything else to do once you
Mm.
leave. You're like, fuck, what happens now? So I joined the army and and did my trade in the army, become a tradesman. Yeah, I did 9 years in the army as a like a maintainer, fitter, and like an armorer, fitter armorer,
Oh, okay.
maintaining weapons, maintaining boats, maintaining outboard motors, that sort of stuff, marine equipment. Yeah, so I did that for about 9 years. And what happens in 2016? Um, I had a breakdown for whatever fucking reason. I still don't know. Um, I was on top of a roping tower. So in Sydney, they've got a 90-foot like roping tower. They do all their sort of roping and abseiling training from that tower. And had a breakdown at the top of the tower. Complete breakdown. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. And they're like, "Well, this is awkward." And I'm like, "No." And it was at night time as well. Um, I'm like, fuck, this is awkward. Anyway, I got down the bottom and I was shaking and I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't feed myself with a fork. And so the only thing I'd do was drink chocolate milk because it was the only thing giving me sustenance. In the end, they've gone, mate, time for you to, how about you take a break? Go and see the psychologist tomorrow. So it's still nighttime. So the next serial was to do prussicking, so climbing up the ropes,
Hmm.
up the tower, and then there was caving ladders as well. The next serial of the course, the roping course, and I had to pull off that course. I had to say, look, not happening. The psychologist was like, yeah, this is not happening for you. And then my next course after that, immediately after that, was a promotion course, and I had to pull off that as well. And in Australia, if you have any sort of setbacks through mental health, mate, your career's over. It's fucking over. So I was downgraded, and worked out that I still had unresolved trauma from the AFP,
Mm.
um, my time in the AFP, and then that's what it had just taken so long to come through. I don't know. Anyway, I saw a psychologist, and she was very good, very good. And then one day I just went, "Oh, this psychology thing's working." Uh, hmm, okay, so I just enrolled part time, and then finished that. Got accepted into honors, and then got accepted into masters, and then genuinely believed that I could be a psychologist, and here we are. Yeah. So that
Wow.
really I went and saw a really good psych, and she had emigrated to Australia from Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War.
Mm.
So she experienced time, um, albeit as a civilian teenager, she'd experienced time in a conflict zone. So she was okay with talking about traumatic things that happened. Very good psych, and so I just enrolled. The rest is history, really.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I'm kind of not ashamed, but I'm really disappointed. I've given you a very, very quick sort of broad overview of one incident in Canberra that sort of was a bit traumatic, and it's been a pretty brief sort of overview. But I'm a bit ashamed of the fact that car accident affected me more than I'd sort of hoped. I mean, it's only one sort of traumatic incident. It's not that big a deal. I mean, look, yeah, we could have died, but we didn't. Um, yeah, look, I mean, I guess so. We were spinning. I was in the car. We were spinning. We were going around 360 degrees, spinning
Mm.
at 3 times. We hit a sign, and then we hit a concrete pole, and the pole's come down. And it's taken the side of the car, and then we hit a tree. You can see it on my Instagram. I can send you photos after this anyway of the car. And they cut the driver out, and I just sort of kicked my way out. And I used to have bad dreams about driving into crowds of people.
Hmm.
Yeah, so there was that. There was another time when there was a fire at a like a where's my dog? At block of flats. There was another government housing where there was different sort of people in there. And this guy had tried to set gas bottles on fire,
Mm.
at barbecue gas bottles, and you could hear explosions going off. But I think they might have just been your sort of deodorant or shaving cream canisters going off. Anyway, you could see there was gas bottles in there, and you could see huge flames going up with like black smoke going up the stairway. So the stairway's here, the doorway's there, type thing. As you look at it, and you could hear it. You could actually hear the noise. And he's standing out the front with a golf club. And he just says, and he starts practicing his swing. And I'm like, mate, what's doing? You know, can you just fucking calm that down? And then he attacked us with the golf club. So we just ended up just taking the golf club off him, sort of thing. And then the guy I was with, in Australia, you have to have people in custody. You have to be watched. You can't just leave them in a car and just leave them there.
Mm.
You've got someone in custody, they have to be watched by a policeman. So you can't just. So Ben, the guy I was with, watched the dude, and then it was me left to evacuate about 40 flats, I think. Because it was daytime, people were at work. So there wasn't heaps of people to evacuate.
Mm.
But you could hear more and more. And then the glass was like fucking cracking. And then the fireys turned up and they were about to go in, but you could see this orange sort of glow. And that was the actual gas bottle that had listed up and was ready to blow. So I'd walked up and said, can you just kind of not go in? And so what they did is they wet the windows to cool down inside. And then finally it cooled it down. They went in and there was like, the guy had like, he had all the kitchen drawers wide with diesel. So that if you opened them up, diesel would pour down on you. And then there was something to do with like a flame initiation thing to the left. So diesel would pour on you, open up another drawer or cupboard, and then it would like flame. So the idea was to burn you. And so dudes are going in going, fuck, check this out. They found explosive residue in there. There was a couple of magazines, rounds in there. Yeah, that was pretty full on. Yeah, that was pretty fucking full on, actually. He was just like, yeah, I've set on fire. He just said, they're my bridges. I burned them. I own the place. Yep, no big deal. And I think he was having like a psychotic episode, basically an active psychotic episode. So probably where he believed that he needed to burn the house because the house was evil, you know, that maybe that sort of thing. I'm not sure. I didn't really stick around to ask him about it, but, you know. But, I mean, and there was this other car accident I went to where the driver had driven and there was a change from 80 to 100 zone. So the passengers that survived actually said, he said, oh, it's 100 zone. And as he went to 100 zone, he went to accelerate and the car lost traction and crashed. And the driver was trapped. The backseat passenger was trapped as well. And the fireys were there. And this little boy came up to me. So it's dark. It's in a rural area. And this little 10-year-old boy, or maybe 8-year-old boy came up. And it was a rural area. What's this 8-year-old boy doing here? They're cutting this woman out. And she was life extinct, like pronounced life extinct. She was dead. And this kid just walked up. I go, hey, mate, what are you doing here? He goes, I was the passenger. So the lady next to him had died. And this little boy is just like, hey, mate, how's things? So we actually watched that. And ambos and fires get this all the time. This only happened to me once. You know? But we watched that lady. She was talking. And one of the things that worked out is when there's no switch to near-death experience, but when people are about to die, they'll get eye contact and they'll only say a couple of words. There's only a couple of words they'll say and they're very honest and there's just huge eye contact. And she was talking to me, talking to this next guy. And then they cut her out. As soon as they took the door off, they took the pressure off her leg and then her leg, I guess all the blood ran into her leg out of her circulatory system. And then she unfortunately died as they were taking her to the ambulance. Yeah, I mean, that happened once. That was a shame. And then the boy, like, mate, what's doing? And because it's cold, remember I was saying it's cold and it was Canberra, so I ended up giving my jumper to another passenger who was there. She was a passenger, or she stopped off. Can't remember. And it was a bit raining. And in the end, I felt really bad. I said, "Look, I can't give you my police jumper. I've got to get it back." And but I got it back. But yeah, she and the driver was screaming because he's like, "Let me out, let me out, let me the fuck out." He was screaming and carrying on. He'd caused the accident. He ended up pleading not guilty, which I couldn't believe. There was no one else. There was no one else to blame. It turned out that one of the causes was his wheels. He'd done a lot of burnouts in his time, so the tires were bald, or what they called smooth tires, and so that loss of traction had caused the loss of stability in the car, and he's crashed. And I'm not sure if he got found guilty or not, but so I guess there were things like that. I mean, I did see a 12-year-old. He we're on top of a roof, and it was raining again, and he was going to jump off. He was actually going to jump, and it was a two-story roof, but it was only about 9 meters tall. It wasn't heaps, but it was enough to cause damage to him. He's a 12-year-old dude, and I'm negotiating with him. And it was sunny, but it was raining at times. And I had my sunnies on. I got close enough to him, and I handed him my sunnies because the sun had just come through, and he's gone to reach for the sunnies, and then I've grabbed him, pulled him in because he's about to fall off. He decided that's it. But before that, he's grabbed like a nail and he started cutting his wrist, and he's just talking to me, talking nice and calm, cutting. And at first, I didn't realize what he was doing. I was like, "Hey, fuck, I didn't realize." Anyway, so I've gone, sun's out like it is now, handed him the glasses, and then grabbed him. I ended up getting my glasses back, but we grabbed him, and then stopped him from hurting himself, I guess. But that was because he wanted to live with his dad instead of his mum. He was only like 12. And then, funnily enough, his dad turned up with German heritage, and he had that, those outfits you see at Oktoberfest, where those men wear those funny hats and the bib and overalls and stuff, wearing that. So
Oh,
he's
wow.
tried to really kind of done his best to attempt suicide. And then this dude just bounces in some sort of Oktoberfest outfit, starting speaking German, while he's wrestling with us as we're putting him in the back of the paddy wagon. The child, yeah, it's a real scene.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
it's funny. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes.
oh, absolutely. I'm just like, man, what's going on? In the end, someone else spoke to him. I couldn't understand it that time. Funny. But I mean, nothing massive. Like, so I kind of was a bit upset at myself that I had back to the army, had that sort of breakdown. I mean, there was a near drowning incident in the army. I mean, that was, I nearly drowned, but I didn't think that was that big a deal. That was a parachuting incident. So it was my first ever parachute jump, 1999. And in if you're doing a water jump, you jump out of the back of a C-130 Hercules, and yeah, it's a ramp descent. You walk it, and you fall. Anyway, I've gone into the water. Obviously, my entry wasn't as good as it could be, and then the risers got stuck around my neck, and so I've come up. And you actually come up. It's a fair way of swimming. Up you go in, and you're swimming up. And I got to the top of the water, and I'm being dragged down because the risers around my neck, and that's connected to the chute. The chute had gathered water and was pulling me down. So I was like, "Fuck." Anyway, this guy come across in a Zodiac to pull me out. He's lifted me up onto the pontoon, but I'm choking. So then they let me go, and I'm nearly drowning. And they pull me up, and I'm choking. And they let me
Oh
go, and I'm drowning.
man.
In the end, they grabbed me, with a jackknife, cut the risers. I put my foot on the pontoon. I tear a muscle into there. And then I get in, and then they're like, "Mate, it's Friday Arvo. Let's not worry about it." And so I went to the pub and got pissed, and we were back jumping again on the Monday. If that happened these days, I don't know whether they'd be so relaxed, but that happened. That was my first ever fucking parachute descent. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but these things happen. I mean, that's the thing is, you should know what you're getting into. You know, risks are going to occur, and that's part of the job, really.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I just, it's the funny thing about trauma too, because you, you never know when it's going to show up. It's like you think you're able to process things, or at least in the moment, or you feel like, okay, it's fine. It's been a couple days, it's been a couple months, shoot, sometimes it's a year or two, and then just randomly out of the blue, something, whether it's a smell, a memory, or just something, just random, just something
Yeah.
triggers it. And you're shaking, you get the cold sweats, you start coming back to that incident, and you're just like, what the fuck is this? Where the hell did this come from? And it's funny sometimes how our brain can work, and we're able to, at least in the moment, stuff things down, or our brain wanting to protect us, like, okay, we're not going to think about this shit right now, but 2 years from now, when you're at a barbecue randomly with all your friends and family, this incident's going to come up again, and all this shit's going to come
Yeah.
back up.
We're unable to predict how long we can uh, put away our thoughts, and we're unable to predict how they're going to affect us. So I guess awareness and acceptance is big there. We need to accept that these things did occur, and then need to be aware of the ramifications of when and how you deal with those memories. Um, so if we're not accepting, then we're not going to ask for help. So asking for help's a big deal. It's part of acceptance, and it's also part of being aware of, you know, what's really troubling you and how to fix it. And I think
Right.
it's not only just what you've discussed comes up, what we've discussed in this episode comes up, but also what happens next. So we don't know how long it's going to take to get better.
Mhm.
Um, we don't know how much better we're going to get. We don't know how to get there. So
Mhm.
there's all this uncertainty. So uncertainty, and then we're also uncertain as to how we're going to be seen in the world, how others are going to see us as well. It's
Right.
probably why trauma gets. It can be a contributing factor as to why trauma gets repressed.
Right.
Also, cultural. You're in the police or the army. You don't want to come to work and say, "Oh, Johnny can't go to the range because he's depressed." You want to be able to perform and function. Because as I said earlier on, people they're living to kill, and if you're doing a job, then um, you're living to kill yourself. So if you are not good enough to take on the terrorist or the enemy, then you're going to become basically currency. You're going to get killed yourself. So I think with that attitude, a lot of our roles we do, especially in the military, it's the currency or the language is death. And if you're not fluent in death, then you're going to come off second best. And so if we're saying, "Oh, I'm depressed," or "I'm not feeling well mentally today," then it's accepted that that person may be coming off second best in their job. So then we're worried about being, negatively viewed or pushed out type thing. So I think if we change our view or how we accept others who need to accept themselves,
Mhm.
then we'd be better off, because no one's immune from PTSD, major depression, anxiety. We're not immune from it.
Right.
There is no immunity from it. Um, so I think we need acceptance and awareness as big things that we need to sort of buy into as human beings when dealing with the trauma of our policing, military service.
Right.
That's my view.
Yeah. It's yeah, there's I think we've made a lot of strides, but I think there's still a lot more work that could be done regarding just the stigma, and being able to spread the word about mental health, and be able to get first responders, the specific resources that they need. Because I know you talked a little bit earlier about, Army, if you feel like if you're seen as like psychologically there might be something, or you need a psych for any reason, your career's done.
Oh yeah, especially in the army. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's over. You just get pushed into what we have in Australia, training command, where
Hmm.
training schools, and off you. That's where you just get sent. That's where you'll be for a while. Um, so yeah, often people just leave. And that also ties into people not saying anything. You don't tell anyone,
Right.
and eventually you'll end up snapping. As in, like, not as in snap, but eventually it'll be too much for you to take, and then you'll end up having, like a breakdown type situation where you simply cannot even do the basic things like feed yourself.
Right.
This is what happened. Yeah, and I had to drink chocolate milk because I couldn't bring my fork up to my mouth. I didn't have the coordination, and that's a lot of repressed memories there. So
Right.
um, you don't want that happening. Yeah.
Right. And so now you as a psychologist, um, and you being a veteran and a police officer, what would you say are maybe some warning signs that, listeners can maybe just kind of think about, or maybe, things that they may see with, other fellow first responders, or things that may be happening with themselves that, things to look out for. Like, maybe I need to reach out to someone, or maybe, because I know it varies. Everyone takes trauma a little bit differently, but, what do you think are just some general things to maybe to look out for in themselves and others?
Yeah, so I feel, the throwaway lines are drinking too much and drugs, but I also feel that the ones that are lesser known would be, let's start off with the basic ones that don't really cause harm. So getting sort of dopamine hits from heaps of social media, listening to the same song for minutes, hours on end because you're escaping the same song over and over again because you're getting that same day, that staring at walls, counting bricks, or trying to find patterns in bricks or walls or something like that. That's trancing, that's sort of escaping. They're your basic sort of smaller ones. Removing yourself from society, like, I just want to be left alone, just leave me alone. That's another one. Where you just don't see yourself associating with people. It's a lot of effort to have conversations with people, because when you're conversing with people, you're accepting them as well as they're accepting you. You're accepting their behaviors, attitudes, their thoughts. They may want to do something that you don't want to do. So I think the constant need to be comfortable
Mm-hmm.
is where you're escaping from reality. So if all you want to do is sit on the couch and watch TV, all you want to do is sleep in. I don't want to go to work tomorrow. I just want to sleep in. The next day, I just want to sleep in. You're more sort of uh, other ones, more destructive ones would be an increase in alcohol or risk taking, sort of, for sexual behavior where you're just meeting people and using them for sex and waking up the next morning and the cycle goes again. We're not talking one-offs. We're not talking, Anzac Day one-off type thing. We're talking a consistent, once it becomes, your behaviors become a habit, there's consistency there, then you start thinking to yourself, well, I need to go and get help. So you're consistently drinking. There's heavy drinking, but you can still function. Then there's consistently drinking, and it's taking away your ability to function. You can't sleep properly. You can't go to work. You can't get in the car and drive and do things you normally do because you're drunk.
Right.
So things like that. They're more extreme behaviours, but it would start off with, in the sense that you're probably getting a bit little short with people. You're not accepting other people's sort of company. Your behaviour is, your work is getting less and less in quality. So you start to see that, because it doesn't go from perfect attending, being polite, perfect report writing, helping out your mates, socialising, be the guy to rely upon, all of a sudden to being the person who hits the beers, has a few rums, and then goes to bed, and then removes himself entirely from society. That doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
So you don't go from one extreme to another within 48 hours. It's a from a dimensional scale of 1 being normal, if there is such a thing, 10 being the most destructive, you go all the way up to that 10 from 1 here. That happens over time. So if you capture it when you're at 3, 4, 5, and if you're only going up 3, 4, 5, 6 in severity, and you're not going down, hey, on Anzac Day, whatever, you're going up to 6, you've smashed beers, but you're going down to 3, fair enough. But if you're always increasing in your avoidance or destructive behaviors, then that's when it's time to seek help. If there's no lessening, or if there's no stopping of destructive behaviors, then it's time to seek help. And some of those behaviors may be victimless. They may only affect you whereby you are sort of escaping reality by listening to the same song for 2 or 3 hours on end, or sleeping in 6 days in a row or going to bed at 2 a.m. and then waking up at 11 and then not eating, and then having a few drinks, or not answering your phones to your mates because you want to avoid any contact with the outside world because it's just too much. You just can't handle it. When you can't interact as another human being like you used to, that's when it's time. Because the earlier you catch depression or PTSD, the much more manageable and easier it will be to treat.
Right.
The quicker you may respond to treatment, the quicker you can get back to sort of what's called pre-morbid settings, and morbid is a word for the event that's occurred that caused the trauma. Right. So, pre-event settings, the quicker you can return. So the earlier it gets caught, the easier or more manageable it's going to be to fix. And the less you have to deal with, the less you have to tell someone, the less you're going to be out of work, the less people, the less you're going to be exposed to other people's negative attitudes towards you because you're seeing something. Because by the time you get to where I got, where I could hardly lift the spoon to my mouth, that took me probably a good year to come back after that.
Wow.
A long time. That's like I don't know the word for it really. I guess I should. That's like a breakdown. That's like fucking action. I had to pull off courses, and people had to, people missed out on put someone else on the course and stuff. It's a big deal for my mates, and then I had to come home to Tracy, my wife, and say this is what's happened. Series of psychologists, had to go and have a neuropsychologist do testing on my brain because I thought I had a traumatic brain injury because I didn't have the memories, I wasn't processing properly. It's a big deal. You don't want to get to that state,
right? And it's a lot of it's scary. That's a lot of scary shit. For this to suddenly come out of nowhere, and then you're like, "What's wrong with me?"
Yeah, and in the unit I was in, that was very unaccepted. So that's that's just one of those things. But you don't want to get to that stage. So once again, back to that awareness and acceptance. And I think people need to be aware of options. You can't take an option if you don't know there's an option there to take.
Right.
But as long as they're aware of the supports that they have around them, and they can use that to access the support. So, for example, if I'm listening to the same song for 2 hours on end, or if I'm avoiding answering the phones to someone, then that's a smaller stage. Then I need to tell my wife or my mum, or go out and walk the dog, so that the smaller sort of trauma responses have smaller rectifying responses. You know what I mean? Like a 2 trauma response has a 2 rectifying response. But if you've got a 10, the amount of responses required for that is going to be more. It's going to be more than one person. It's going to be a psychologist, it's going to be your wife, it's going to be your boss. It's going to be huge. So the bigger the response, the bigger the remedial issues that are going to go with it. So if we acknowledge some things are human, but then other things are part of something bigger, something clinical, such as depression or PTSD, then we can acknowledge that we can get help. We need to be okay with getting help, and then be okay with people receiving help. Less stigma around that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
It's
is a challenge, for at least in Australia. It's a big challenge. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely makes a difference being, the difference between being proactive and, reactive, rather than,
Yeah, great point. Yeah, absolutely.
um, you know, rather than say, you wait for something traumatic to happen on the job and now you're at like an 8 or 9 on the reactionary scale and you're like, oh shit, like you said, that's going to come with psychologists, psychiatrists, and a lot of the after effects that come with something negative like that because you have a reaction. Whereas, say, or even, like even beforehand, being on the job and already seeing a therapist, not needing one, but just having one, just coming with the job, and then when something happens, your reactionary scale is at maybe a 4 or a 5.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're right. Um, and I do some volunteer work with an organisation called Disaster Relief Australia. You guys have Team Rubicon over there.
Mm,
Yeah, well, we're their equivalent. We used to actually used to be called Rubicon. We're the equivalent of those dudes, I guess, in Australia. And I'm one of the people that goes well-being officers. I'm one of the people that goes with. They call them waves. The deployment of people, I go with them, and I'm there every day, every hour of every day for that specific reason. Proactive, so that if someone says Josh, and it happens every day, Josh, you need to have a chat with that bloke or that woman. Okay, no worries, off I go and have a chat, and you do your best to nip it in the bud that day. But quite often, people get quite stressed around animals because disasters occur in out in rural areas. So there's beasts, there's cows, bulls, horses, dogs. People can quite often be distressed about what's happened to them. But then when you talk to them about what's happened to the horse, they then say, "Well, in the police force, I saw this." So it's another way of capturing present trauma as well as trauma they haven't dealt with yet. So if you have people there ready to go with the teams of people doing the work, you can
mhm.
capture uh, basically whatever they want to talk about. You're capturing present plus past as well. The thing about psychology, though, is people only see psychologists when something's gone wrong. We
Right.
don't see psychologists when something's gone wrong. So there's already that stigma there or acceptance. You don't go and see the physio to take your shirt off and show them how big your muscles are because there's no point.
Right.
Hey, check me out. Oh, okay, that's great, mate. That'll be $85. But that's not how it works. So psychologists, you only see them when there's something needing to be fixed. So you get back to your functioning. So I think that plays into the stigma as well. But if they're
Exactly.
always there, if well-being guys or counselors or whatever are always there with the teams, then it becomes normalized. Then it's
Right.
not seen as something, it's seen as something that you do every day in your everyday life.
Right.
So I think greater access to mental health clinicians is also required. It's one of those things we need to do as well.
Right. It's at least over here, I'm not sure how it is over there. It feels like the only time, you know, we get psychological care or have any type of like psychological assistance is before, like with us going through the backgrounds, you do your psych check, you know, and then maybe when you're on the job and you get into an officer involved shooting, then you see the department shriek or psychologist. But outside of that, you're pretty much, you're on your own. It's they here, they put such an emphasis on, they want you to be physically fit, they want you to be in the best shape, and but it's like there's damn near no emphasis on your psychological well-being. Like, why is it the only time that we need to be seeing psychs, or like you said, making it normalized is when either A, before you get on the job to make sure you're psychologically okay, or wait until shit has hit the fan and you've gotten an officer involved shooting, or you're so depressed that you feel like you want to eat your gun. And that's the only time
Oh,
that
yeah.
you get any
Yeah.
type of psychological assistance. Whereas, like you said, I think normalizing and have just kind of just mandatory check-ins, like you said, at this point, once every couple months, once every 6 months, just to check in, come in, hey, how's everything going? And like you said, being able to nip it in the bud before, it gets out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So your point is nip it in the bud. Yeah. So being aware that a person needs assistance and being able to provide that assistance is where really, aside from spending millions on groundbreaking research that we may or may not even use, we could do the basics, and that is what I said, and what you're saying as well is be available for people to receive help, and then provide that help when they need it or before it becomes too serious, that it becomes a broader issue. So you could have a tier of psychological help. You could have someone who's there, available, ready to go, and then later on you would remove them from their job and they would undergo, if they need to, more clinical care. But at the moment, it's only clinical care that people are getting, and they're away from the job. And which means, being a government job, you have to fill that position. You can't get them promoted. There's a person down, blah, blah. So all we're doing now at the moment is providing clinical care for someone who's unable to continue with their life or occupation because of their mental health issues. And with that mental health, what people should be more aware of is with mental health issues comes physical issues, higher blood pressure, bowel issues, heart issues, weight issues, cholesterol, not wanting to train as much, putting on weight gain, loss of libido, all that sort of stuff. So if you've lost your libido, it's well and truly time to go and see a psychologist, because you can get Viagra, that's cool, but that's a band-aid.
Yeah.
That's a real thing that we as blokes don't talk about.
You're
if you've
right.
lost your libido, then that's a sign that motivation has waned. It's just libido loss usually is a sign that that's sort of depression, post-traumatic stress has really set in. It's chronic. It's become a lot, because you don't go from Johnny Sins to not wanting to have sex in a 36-hour period. It just doesn't happen that way.
That's probably the best way. That's probably the best way I've ever heard it put. You're right.
Glad to help out. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, that's, of all the psych classes I've taken, that's probably the best phrase I've heard it put. Um, no, you're absolutely right. And that is specifically, I think, amongst men, is a taboo topic that, again, something else that I think that needs to be normalized. And you're right. It's a very big, a warning sign for, for PTSD or just psychological struggles or challenges that you're going
Yeah,
through.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so, Josh, I wanted to thank you for your service and everything you've done, but also being able to come on and talk about, your own challenges that you dealt with and everything that you're doing now as a psychologist. And before we sign off here, I was just wondering if you had any last thoughts or any words of wisdoms to give to our listeners.
Mate, I've really enjoyed having a chat with you. Thank you so much. Uh, I guess we need to understand that your trauma is not your fault. You are not responsible for what's occurred, and it's not really the physical injury that's caused the trauma. It's the idea that someone is it's the act of them causing that physical injury that causes the trauma. So the broken leg isn't the cause of your PTSD. It's the what's actually caused the broken leg. So it's not really your fault that you have any trauma exposure. But what I would say is you've probably earned your post-traumatic stress, but you've earned your recovery even more. So if you go out there and recover, and you'll become better for it. And there is a thing called post-traumatic stress growth, and that is where you become, I don't know if it's more intelligent, but you become wiser, a different person after you have sort of passed through the gate or the door of your trauma. You become back a lot stronger mentally, a lot more resilient as well. So there's only really positives to going through trauma, or only really positives to go through trauma recovery and counselling, and there's really only negatives await for you if you avoid it. really. So choose comfort or choose being uncomfortable doing your trauma recovery, and you'll be better off afterwards, really. Because it's not your fault. What you went through is not your fault at all. So don't blame yourself. And yeah, I wish you guys all the best. Yeah.
Josh, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and being able to talk to the listeners. And no, I appreciate you having you on.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.